People are demanding more from life, and many of the old scripts they inherited are outdated and bring nothing but anxiety and stress. Does this sound familiar? Individuals in the world itself are experiencing a tremendous shift in energy and consciousness, and while unsettling at times, it can be the ride of a lifetime if navigated properly. That's where this show, Mind to Heart, with me, Craig Richardson, carves a pathway from your mind to your heart to activate that innate compass to overcome whatever life sends your way. So won't you join me for this powerful, inspirational, and fun experience? And let the journey begin. Hi, my name is Craig Richardson, and welcome to Mind to Heart. In this show, we take a journey from our logical, critical mind to our heart center, where real transformation can occur. My guests help us understand our journeys by telling us about their paths and the lessons they've learned along the way. Last weekend, we officially passed into spring with the equinox, although it might not seem so depending on where you're located. It's also a signal that the holiest religious holidays of both Judaism and Christianity are now upon us. In fact, Easter is set to fall on the first Sunday following the full moon that comes on or after the vernal equinox, so there's a tie-in there. Holy Week begins with a celebration of Jesus' triumphant entrance into Jerusalem, where he's mounted on a foal and is greeted with crowds waving palm branches and singing Hosannas. It was a time of great anticipation that positive change was now coming. The long-awaited Messiah had finally arrived. Yet by Friday, Jesus is arrested, betrayed by one of his own 12, and everyone except for his mother, Mary Magdalene, and best friend, St. John the Baptist, desert him. He's left to die on the cross, which is saved for the worst of the criminals. All seems lost until Easter morning, when his disciples check his tomb and find the stone rolled away. He is risen is the cry of Easter Sunday. There's a lot to unpack in the story of Jesus' final week of his public ministry. It's steeped in theology, and most of the foundations of the Christian faith emerge from the events of Holy Week. It also represents the archetype of the hero's journey, which my shows are all about. When all seem lost, the hero, Jesus in this case, is able to escape death and is now an inspiration to billions around the world more than 2,000 years later. With me today to sort out the richness of Holy Week, and in particular what it looks like in 2021, is my good friend, Dr. Robert Moynihan. Bob's journey, like mine, began in New England, he Connecticut and me Massachusetts. He earned his BA in English, magna cum laude from Harvard, and an MA and PhD in medieval studies from Yale. He founded a magazine, Inside the Vatican, nearly 30 years ago, and spends his time traveling between Rome and the U.S. when it's permissible, as well as dedicating a great deal of his time to the reunification of the Roman and Eastern Orthodox churches. He's had a front row into the tremendous changes, both good and bad, that have occurred over the last 40 years, particularly within the Catholic Church, as well as Christianity and formal religion in general. Bob, welcome to Mind to Heart.
Well, thank you, Craig, for inviting me.
It's great to see you. As I mentioned in the intro, so we have Holy Week coming up, and in a way, it can almost be seen as a metaphor for Christianity in general, for where it came nearly 2,000 years ago, for where it was today. It had a triumphant period. Certainly, was very important in the founding of Western civilization and other impacts. Yet it seems like we're entering in a period where we're now, maybe we're at Wednesday, Thursday, potentially even a Good Friday now with the church and other formal religions. So can you tell me, what your sense is on the state of Christianity in general at this point, and the church in particular?
Okay, Craig, you're right. Our church has passed through a triumphant period, and I'm going to cite the Catechism. It's a book that summarizes the church's teaching, and it was produced. The new version was produced in the 1990s under Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger and promulgated by Pope John Paul II. Came out in 1992. And it talks about the church's ultimate trial in paragraph 675, and I've called it up here so I can read it to you. Before Christ's second coming, the church must pass through a final trial. that will shake the faith of many believers. This is in the Catechism. The persecution that accompanies her pilgrimage on earth will unveil the mystery of iniquity, in Latin, mysterium iniquitatis. The persecution that accompanies her pilgrimage on earth will unveil the mystery of iniquity in the form of a religious deception, offering men an apparent solution to their problems at the price of apostasy from the truth. The supreme religious deception is that of the Antichrist, a pseudo-messianism by which man glorifies himself in place of God and of his Messiah come in the flesh. Now, I've been working also with this famous Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, who also shares this view, although he has not managed to conclude that this actually is the end time. He does think that it's a time of great trial with aspects that refer to this test. And we know that this comes often, so we don't know if this is the final one, but the next chapter of the Catechism says, 676, the Antichrist's deception already begins to take shape in the world every time the claim is made to realize within history that messianic hope, which can only be realized beyond history through the eschatological judgment. The Church has always rejected even modified forms of this falsification of the kingdom to come under the name of millenarianism, especially the intrinsically perverse political form of a secular messianism. What that means is that every human, political or social or religious movement that says the kingdom will appear here due to our science, due to the power we have over nature, or due to some type of class war or race war that we will carry out almost pitilessly against those who cannot participate in the kingdom, is all false. And it starts so clearly in this Holy Week narrative that you summed up nicely at the opening of the program. All of Jesus' disciples were hesitating as they attempted to understand who he was and what he intended to do, what kind of teacher, what kind of king he intended to be. It's my belief that he was the actual descendant physically of King David. And the book of Matthew and the scriptures say that both Mary and in a different line, Joseph, were both descended from King David. So he actually was the heir to the throne of David. However, he ended being executed. But his disciples thought when he went into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, which is this coming Sunday, that he would take the kingdom, that he would be declared the King of Israel.
But their biggest, I think, their biggest mistake was, and we see that played out in the trial when Pontius Pilate says, "Are you a king?" And he says, "I'm not a king of this world." And so it wasn't the biggest mistake that they were looking for a messianic kingdom that was going to come in with an army behind it and start throwing the Romans out? I mean, they misunderstood who he was from the beginning.
Absolutely. So they were with him for months and years, and they still didn't understand. And the moment that most graphically characterizes that is when he speaks with Peter. And Peter says, "Lord, what are you doing?" Or, "Master, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm going into Jerusalem where I will be handed over and I will be executed." And Peter said, "No, Lord, that must not happen." And Jesus says to Peter, "Get thee from me, Satan," because it's a temptation to avoid that. And then he says, "You will deny me, Peter. You will say that you never even knew me. You will deny me 3 times the night that I'm arrested before the cock crows the following morning." Peter said, "Never will I deny you." And perhaps in my judgment, the most dramatic scene in all of the New Testament is when Peter hears that because the women standing around, one of the servant girls says, "Weren't you with him? I think I saw you with him." And
I don't know the dude.
Never knew him. And then it happens a second and a third time. They says, you definitely were with him. You even have an accent like a Galilean. That's the group that was around him. He says, no, you've mistaken. And the cock crows. And the passage in Scripture says, Peter heard the cock crow and he remembered the words, and he wept bitter tears because he realized that he was a betrayer himself. And that's the first pope. And in a sense, it's the model for all of us that he could first betray and reject what he never intended to betray and reject, but then he could repent and return and become, in a sense, faithful and loyal. The founder, the first pope. But this whole process raises the question, is this kingdom a dream? Is it pie in the sky? And the communists used to call it the opium of the people. And the first response I have, are you interested in this question?
Yeah.
The first response I would have is no, it's the most real and the most true and the most powerful. But people don't easily recognize it because our minds are rather earthly, earthbound, time-bound. This is a matter of eternity. And everything that falls short of eternity is unworthy of man. According to the Christian and Jewish belief, man is made in the image and likeness of God. God is an eternal being. We are in his image and likeness. All the church theologians and philosophers speak about this. They say, man is a great mystery. He obviously is a physical creature with a body, lives in time, dies, and disappears, evidently. At the same time, he has an eternal longing. He speaks of the infinite. He speaks of the things that are transcending the changeable qualities of time. And I would say every one of us has that moment when we sense that, yes, that is part of us. It's part of our being.
I would say that that's really what drives our journeys, I think, to continue on in these sort of some way endless cycles of Holy Week, where we have good times and then it seems like it's all lost and then it comes back again. So I think that's really that particular thing, what you just described, is really what makes us human, I think.
Yeah. Actually, I once heard the definition of man is that being who is not himself unless he transcends himself. That's a paradox. But if we just accept, let's say, bread and wine and then daily life, which of course is blessed and beautiful, but if we live only by bread alone and not by the words that speak of eternity or the words that speak of truth, the words that come from the mouth of God. Jesus said that, one of his famous sayings, man does not live by bread alone. Doesn't mean we don't need bread and we don't need physical life, but man does not live by that alone, but by every word that issues from the mouth of God. Now, this is another mystery, and how do we access these words, and which words are they, and which do we...
Well, I think we're going to take our first break, and I think that's a good place to stop, because what I'd like to get into when we get after the break is exactly that. How do we embrace that Easter Sunday? Because I do think we've been through a pretty good trial here, but I also see signs, of hope and signs of increased spirituality. I mean, I'm a reformed religion. So why don't we get into that sort of Easter Sunday topic when we get back after the break?
The Truth is Funny. Shift Happens with monthly guest host Karen Benton. Tune in for powerful conversations about health and wellness. Karen brings unique insights rich with humor and science to her discussions with experts in medicine, movement, psychology, spirituality, and so much more. Don't miss Karen on The Truth is Funny every third Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com. For more information about Karen, visit KarenBetton.com.
Grace your space with flair. Dragon art to soothe your soul by Colette Marie Steffen is available now. Colette invested an average of 6 months on each painting. Her piece titled Courage took 3 years to complete. The paintings are printed with the latest technology to best capture the true essence of the paintings. Browse the 64 dragons and dragonflies and order your paintings today at talesfromthevector.com.
What we've been taught and told is not all there is. Life is all about energy, and the energy you feel is real. Tune into the Energy Paradigm each month on transformationtalkradio.com with Dr. Vic. The Energy Paradigm is an eye-opening, mind-shifting, transformative, and earth-shattering way to live, work, and do business that will enable you to unlock your magic every day. Visit theenergyparadigm.com.
Hey there, I'm Ricky Schwartz from My Turn Life Coaching, Reclaim Your Life. My last tip to listeners was to list your top 5 core values and then convert each of them to a statement. At the time, one of my examples was passion, and passion fuels my perseverance. And yes, I found this exercise to be the best first step toward helping my clients to reclaim their lives. But there's a second exercise that works in tandem with the first. This time, write down your top few negative core value statements about yourself or the world in general. 2 examples may be, if people knew the true me, they would never accept me, or people are generally untrustworthy. Afterwards, ask yourself 2 questions. Are you surrounding yourself with people who don't share or at least support your positive core values? And are your negative core values, or those of others, drowning out your positive core values? If yes to either, you've extinguished your ability to make personalized decisions. Go to myturnlifecoaching.com and let's unleash the power of your core values.
Hi, welcome back to Mind to Heart with your host, Craig Richardson, and my guest, Dr. Robert Moynihan. If you'd like to get a hold of Bob, he, as I said, is the founder of Inside the Vatican magazine. So that's insidethevatican.com. And my website is craigericardson.com. Bob, welcome back to the show. When we took our break, we were sort of segueing from sort of that Good Friday, and there still is a lot of shaking out. But I think there's hope as well. And you talked about humanity's sort of inbred desire to transform itself into really a divine. And there's a lot of that going on. But I think the irony is that the institutions themselves, that in the Catholic Church's case would be the Vatican, and then sort of our global structures, they are the ones that almost seem to need to be dissipating so that the individual themselves can come forward, maybe within a formal tradition such as Christianity or Judaism or Islam even, but almost outside of the institutions themselves. And do you see that as part of the Easter Sunday movement?
Yes, I do. We know there's been a lot of corruption in the church, as there is that can be in each of us, but the church bringing together people who are professedly committed to spreading the message of Christ and of being faithful to it. Nevertheless, they're human beings, and they are sometimes corrupt. They get attracted by power, they get attracted by authority, and we've seen the type of scandals that have emerged. This has led millions of people to lose any confidence and any trust in the church authorities. There remains, nevertheless, always the path of the personal search, whether it's through prayer and reflection or studying the scriptures or small groups. And I think there's always hope. I would say that for me, the 3 days of Easter are called the Triduum, the 3-day Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and then Easter Sunday. Good Friday is this sorrowful day of absolute pain and rejection of all hope, apparently. Saturday is a day of silence. It's a day when, even according to theology, Jesus is dead, but he's still living according to our teaching and harrowing hell. But it's a silent day. It's the sort of silent day in the middle of the year, in the middle of the world. And then the light comes on the morning of Easter Sunday with a great mystery as well, because the tomb is empty. And Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb to wash the body. They hadn't had time on Friday evening. They buried him hastily. And she finds that the stone is rolled back and there's no body. And she goes and tells the other disciples, and they're kind of thinking, well, she must be wrong. She maybe went to the wrong place. And Peter and John then run to the tomb, and they say, in Scripture, John writes this later, the Gospel of John, he says, the younger man ran faster, and he got to the tomb before Peter, but he waited at the entrance till Peter caught up. And then they both looked inside, and they see the cloths kind of crumpled on the stone where the body had been laying, and they see a little round cloth separate, which is what we believe was the shroud of Turin. We believe is that shroud that was all crumpled, and then the little thing that was separate in sort of a circle, we believe is what we later will call Veronica's veil, or the veil that picked up the image of Christ's face, and perhaps is identifiable now with the veil in Montepello, Italy, which is increasingly being investigated as a very strange image of a man's face with various bruises on his face in a little village in the center of Italy, very small village of less than 1,000 people. So according to our teaching, this Easter Sunday is the beginning of the renewal of the world and the universe, in a sense, and of humanity. Mary, in a sense, is the second Eve, and Jesus, in a sense, is the second Adam, the new founder of the human race, but no longer bound to the earth, but having certain, both human, obviously fully human, and also divine character. So our condition is greater and better than it was or would have been if that fall had not occurred. The church being corrupt as it carries forward this message is a terrible burden. But again, may I quote from the Catechism about the end of all?
Yeah.
After there is a tremendous persecution, which we call the persecution of the Antichrist, paragraph 677, the church will enter the glory of the kingdom only through this final Passover, when she will follow her Lord in his death and resurrection. The kingdom will be fulfilled. Then, not by a historic triumph of the church through a progressive ascendancy, so the church doesn't become the governing class of the world and introduce all its laws, no. But only by God's victory over the final unleashing of evil, which will cause his bride to come down from heaven. God's triumph over the revolt of evil will take the form of the last judgment after the final cosmic upheaval of this passing world. Well, there's all sorts of ways we could take this, but the first thing we might say is that we are in an in-between period. Excuse me.
Which I would say is how you beautifully describe it's Holy Saturday. We're in that silent period, are we not? I mean, the institutions themselves, even in Jesus' time, we saw how corrupt that was. You had Rome, you had the Pharisaicals element, and he was he was representing, and then he's crucified, and you hit that Saturday period where, okay, I can't put my trust in the institutions, yet I don't know, that's almost seems like where we are, is it not?
I think so. It's a paradox. I could quickly summarize this history of the church, which is now 2,000 years old. And it's almost in 4 parts, almost 500 years each, but not quite. The first part really is 283 years from the death of Jesus until the Emperor Constantine. The church was persecuted. Emperor after emperor said, this is a threat to our power. They have another Lord. And they refused to worship the emperor as a god. This was the kind of gnarly and unbending element in the Christian faith. But the emperors disliked it very much, and they executed anyone who wouldn't offer incense to them because they felt that they were politically dangerous. In 313, so after 280 years, they accepted Christianity, And then late in the 300s, they made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. And that is the reason the Christian church inherited the mantle of the Roman Empire. It continued another 1,000 years in two parts. The first was the Dark Ages, when monasticism grew and many tribes flooded Europe and Vikings came in. The next was the rebirth in the High Middle Ages that led all the way to the Renaissance, which is what we call Christendom. And it was that time where the Crusades occurred. And then we've got the past 500 years, from 1500 till today, where the church, which had, in some sense, become preeminent in Western culture, was contested again. First, there was the tremendous division with the Protestants, where Northern Europe became Protestant and the Southern Europe remained Catholic. There's an old phrase, where they drank beer, they went Protestant. Where they drank wine, they stayed Catholic. But by the 18th century, the late American Revolution, French Revolution, late 1700s, mankind, or European man, is becoming humanistic and is leaving, in a sense, behind this soaring vision of man's identification through Christ with the divine. And they change the divine to reflect science and reason. And that's where we've been for the last 200 years. And science and reason, not just for knowing things, but for having power over things. This is the Faustian deal we've made, and this is why we now find ourselves more powerful than ever, but in many ways more unhappy than ever. We think we control nature, we've investigated, dissected it, we've looked into it, and we've used the energies of it, but we don't find ourselves in harmony with it. It's a very explosive mixture in the nuclear bomb. It's a very dangerous thing for our genetic code and all these vibrations that are passing through us. So we're actually ignorant of very many things, and the pride of our science and the ignorance of the possible effects has left us in a pitiable condition. Very, very sad condition.
Well, I think it's interesting because I don't know if you've ever seen that famous T-shirt, but on the front it says, God is dead, Nietzsche. And then when you go by and you look at the back of the T-shirt, it says, Nietzsche is dead, God. So it almost seems where you've described, or up to around the 1900s, the change into the 20th century. But it almost seems, and again, I will go back to the Holy Saturday. So I think even now, I mean, people now are questioning science. So it almost seems we're in that period again of a Holy Saturday. And again, I think this is where the joy and the potential for Easter Sunday comes, because it's always been different. We've never really known what was going to come. First, the church had all the answers, and then science has all the answers. And now I think there's an uncertainty into all of those various disciplines. And so it's a little more wide open. Again, I think that's where the joy comes.
Well, I do think that all of the attempts we make to create a paradise without that mystery that's sacred and holy fall short. So we've got people now think they can live 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 years, but they forget that they're going to be always in time. They're never going to change the consciousness itself to connect with the divine or the holy or the eternal. So they'll go on and on and on, and every year there'll be basketball tournaments, or there'll be a trip to Cancun, and they may have all sorts of pleasures for 500 or 1,000 years. But at a certain moment, somebody will recognize that they're far short of what their true longing is, which is a connection with the divine and with the eternal and with the holy. And they'll say, all of this that we've done still isn't satisfying. So this is, I think, my concept is that the ancients knew this. They told us this. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. But by fear, they mean a type of reverence.
Yeah, reverence, right?
Yeah. And we have a society that doesn't have any fear. We want to dissect anything, even human embryos, and revise them and improve them. But and I I do think that medical science does wonderful things, but the attitude we have toward it is a Promethean attitude that we are the protagonists. We've lost all sense that there are certain things that we ought not to do, certain taboos or boundaries that we ought not to pass, because it's very harmful and will have unintended effects. And
well,
yeah.
And so I was just going to say, we're getting toward the bottom of the hour here, but you've been around, as I said in the intro, the sort of front row to all of this. And when we get back after the break, I want to kind of follow your own personal journey, because I do think we all live out these journeys that we see, like Jesus in Holy Week. Well, we live these out personally. We're sort of cells of the larger body. So when we get back, I want to hear about Dr. Robert Moynihan's journey, and we'll get into that in the second half.
Hi, my name is Diane McClay. I'm comfortable being in front of people. How to make things work in a structured format made me feel a little nervous. Everybody I have worked with on the Transformation Talk team met me with enthusiasm. Their confidence in me spilled over to me and allowed me to just grab onto it and say, oh yeah, that's me and I can own it. Thank you for showing up for me. Thank you for allowing me to put my gifts into the world, and thank you for making me look good while I do it.
Mind to Heart with me, Craig Richardson, carves a pathway from your mind to your heart to activate that innate compass to overcome whatever life sends your way. As an intuitive life coach, I am ready to guide you to an amazing life. Tune in live every second and fourth Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com. For more information about me, visit CraigERichardson.com.
Do you have 22 minutes to transform your life? Join spiritual practitioner and award-winning author Karen Mills Alston and award-winning publisher and broadcaster Sean Patrick Murray as they ask and answer life's most essential questions. Learn to participate in life fully, develop your gifts and talents, be open to limitless possibilities, and become available to your greatest yet to be. All in just 22 minutes a week. Now on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
Did you know that when we talk about the Earth's ecosystems, the most important ecosystem has been left out? We created the ecosystem approach to recapture human potential.
Find us at theecosystemapproach.org.
Join us every Monday at 1 p.m. Pacific Time and 4 p.m. Eastern Time for the Ecosystem Approach Show with Jason and Patricia on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
Hi, and welcome back to Mind to Heart with your host, Craig Richardson, and my good friend and guest, Dr. Robert Moynihan. Again, you can reach me at CraigERichardson.com and Bob Moynihan at InsideTheVatican.com. So, Bob, before the break, we were getting into some of these fairly deep theological issues and things that came out of Holy Week, and as I indicated that, you know, we are personally having our own journey that Jesus did. And so I'd like to begin with you and your journey. As I mentioned in the intro, you are from New England, and we have that in common. I think we were also both English and Irish descent, and so we have that as well. And you were at Harvard around the time that my brother was, and my father went there. So we our paths have crossed a lot. But why don't you sort of begin in Connecticut and kind of tell us what kind of upbringing you had? And obviously the church must have been very important, but can you start there in Astoria, Connecticut?
I can begin with a memory of my father, who was Irish Catholic. My mother was New England WASP Protestant, but my mother converted when she married my dad in the 1950s. Not an untypical story. My mom actually descended from people who were on the Mayflower, and including the elder William Brewster, so I'm descended from him. And Roger Williams, who founded Providence, Rhode Island. But the Good Friday in Connecticut, maybe the first days of April, my father went outside at noon with a missal and he started to turn the pages, and he put a little music on in some way, I guess a record player, Gregorian chant.
Mm.
And I was going to go outside to see if I could bother him and do something with him. And I must have been 5 years old. And my mother said, "Don't bother your father. It's Good Friday, and he likes to be alone from noon until 3, which is the time Jesus hung on the cross." And this was a tradition among many believing Irish Catholics, that you really consecrate the hours of Good Friday to a reflection on the sacrifice made by Christ of his own life. So my father sat there, and I'm kind of looking out the window, and he's kind of reading, and the music was playing. And that gave me a paradigm, or a frame to understand the search that we make in human life. And there's a phrase called sequela Christi, the following of Christ. And later, my father gave me different religious books, and he encouraged me to study the teaching of the church and the lives of the saints, yes, first in little children's versions. So we were raised in that old 1950s style Catholicism, which is so familiar to many people, written the subject of many books. On the good side, it gave a kind of lofty vision. And some people have talked about the bad side, where there's a type of neurosis and scrupulosity and kind of could be a fear of God.
Maybe escape too. There was a way that they weren't dealing with their issues, and
so that's the matrix out of which I constructed myself and my life. I went to school and then did well, and did a lot of running as a cross-country runner, and a lot of reading, books like Tolkien. And I was accepted into college at Harvard. I went there. I was not very happy. I was challenged, and I thought there wasn't a lot of emphasis on the ultimate questions, although perhaps it was partly in me, but it was all about establishing your credentials to become a lawyer or a doctor, get into a
I was also going to mention, because I was 15 minutes from, I grew up in Brookline, which is 15 minutes from my brother there, is class of 7. You were 75, right?
Yes.
Yeah, my brother was 76. And I was going to also ask you, from somebody who's, with that kind of powerful image of your dad, I remember the Harvard Square in the 70s. That was not a time where you were going to be walking around reading a missal on Good Friday. My brother had hair down to here, and he's a lot shorter now, but that was kind of a crazy time there. Everybody, you still had a little of that 60s left over, but the more traditional stuff. So what was that like?
Well, I spent really my whole formative youth engaged with and fighting against what I felt was a kind of a departure from the right path. I thought, well, they're right. People are right to want peace, for example. There was all the demonstration against the Vietnam War, but they were swearing and cursing, and I thought, well, so there were pro-peace Catholics that I liked, like Dorothy Day. I went and visited her in New York City before she died. And I feel that I bring that aspect as well, so that I'm difficult to define. I'm certainly a person with a great reverence for all the tradition that the church carried. But I was educated in these secular universities, both Harvard and Yale. And I realized the arguments that can be made for the aspects that were so-called benighted, or the closing of the Catholic mind, and then the efforts that the Catholics made to be accepted in academia and among all the disciplines, and as historians and scientists, and including in politics, starting with the Kennedys. The country had an ambivalent attitude toward Catholics, and Catholics had an ambivalent attitude toward themselves. So that was it was like an oyster gets a grain of sand inside its shell and starts to be irritated by it. I was irritated by the contradiction between the faith that I really felt my father had handed to me and that I needed to preserve, and this world of opportunity and attractiveness, but also great shortcomings. And year by year, the oyster tries to generate a type of substance which it places around the grain of sand because it's still irritating, but by putting this kind of creamy-like substance, which is first very soft and then hardens, it creates a pearl. That's where pearls come from. Mm. So I had this problem of reconciling the faith with modernity, and everything that I've done is a reaction to that. And I eventually knew, first I decided to try to see if people lived a simpler life, and I lived with the Amish. A family took me in Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, and I didn't graduate from Harvard until 77 because I left for a year and a half.
And you were the Amish for a year and a half.
Well, no, I was only with them for about half a year. And the man that I stayed with just died recently. His name was Moses. And Moses Stoltzfus was very welcoming, but he always said, you're very deluded because you've been, in the world. He said, now that you're with us, you must leave the world behind. And he would introduce me to the neighbors, and they'd say, who's this? And they said, this is Bob Moynihan. He's from the world. He's
from the world. Did you have a business card that said, I'm Bob from the world? Or
yeah. So I left really on the eve of my 21st birthday. I left and I said, I got to go back. My parents expect it, but I too have unfinished business. I've got to engage it and somehow overcome it. And so I went back, got a degree, and a key figure was Walker Percy, an American Catholic author, who helped me to understand the predicament of modern man as enamored by behavioralism and by his understanding of all things material as the key to our existence, but his unhappiness with that answer, because always we have an aspiration for what transcends that. So the matrix of my thinking was shaped in part by him. I wrote my thesis on him, and then I became a newspaper reporter. I couldn't get any other job. Learned how to write articles daily. And one day I was at a school board meeting in Ellington, Connecticut. And after the meeting, I was talking with the school board chairman, and she looked at me and said, what are you doing? You are better than this. You're working on this little local paper. You should go to graduate school. And it was as if an oracle had spoken to me. I said, maybe this isn't my final stop. I had in my mind that I would go to Hartford and then to Providence and then to the Boston Globe and then to the New York Times. That would be my career.
God puts people in our paths, does he not? When you most need him, and that pearl of wisdom, right time, I guess.
Well, I sent a letter to Yaroslav Pelikan at Yale. I said, I've been reading your books. I'd like to study the history of Christian thought from the ancient world up until the early modern period. So I want to apply for the medieval studies period between these periods to study with you. And he wrote me back. He said, I want you to be my student.
Oh, that's amazing. We're going to come up on our final break, because what I really want to do is to spend our last time sort of Yale and then mostly into your experiences with the founding of the magazine and then again what you saw on that.
Well, I got to meet all the popes, John Paul and Benedict, and talked with them, so it was quite an interesting.
Yeah, I don't want to run out of time on that end, because that's a great part of your life as well. So why don't we take a break now? And again, my website is craigerichdson.com, and you can reach Dr. Moynihan at InsideTheVatican.com, and we'll pick you up on the other side of the break. Thank you.
Are you ready to let go of the I can'ts that are holding you down? Valerie Trujillo invites you to join her community on a mission to collectively heal as a tribe. where your vulnerability is heard and reciprocated. So tune in to Love and Light with the Crystal Blue Oracle every second and fourth Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com. For more information about Valerie and her work, visit crystalblueoracle.com.
How do you feel? Just okay? Well, how about you tune in and get ready to be more with the Healing Hour with me, Doc Martin, every third Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com. I'm ready for your questions, and I can't wait to help you find the answers. Every month, we'll have a new live call-in show with innovative topics and a powerful hour of healing. To learn more about me, visit DrSharonMartin.com. See you there. I'm going to be here. You won't want to miss it.
Tune in to The Crooked Climb with Suzanne Taylor King and Denise Stiegel, committed to guiding your journey through the world through mindfulness and personal care. These ladies are rebellious, real, funny, and powerful, helping you realize your full potential while navigating the twists and turns life always brings us. Tune in live every second and fourth Friday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
Welcome back to Mind to Heart with your host, Craig Richardson, and I'm honored to have my good friend and guest, Dr. Robert Moynihan. Bob, before we took the break, you had just written to a professor at Yale. So why don't we pick up with that? Because I think this last segment, sir, your things really opened up for you. So why don't we start there with the letter to the professor?
Yeah, I suppose each of us has various fathers, and I had my father in the garden on Good Friday, and Jaroslav Pelikan became my Doktorvater, as they call it in German, my teacher father. And he was from Chicago, from a Czech and Serb background. His father had become a Lutheran minister, and his mother was Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, I believe. And he knew from an early age German, and he knew, Serbian. And then he studied Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and became a scholar. And by the end, he had studied Syriac and other, of course, French and Italian and Spanish, and he knew 17 languages. It was a standard. It was like going up, say, if you were a baseball player with Hank Aaron or Mickey Mantle or somebody. And he was a believing Christian. He was an ordained minister, but he wasn't a Catholic. But he thought in terms of the Catholic in the small c, the Catholic community, that he identified by three characteristics, which he took from Isidore of Seville. What we have all believed in all times, everywhere. These were the characteristics of Orthodox doctrine. And he wrote books on the development of doctrine that he published in 5 volumes called I have a copy here. The development, I think it's the Christian tradition, the development of doctrine, and he takes it century by century from the time of Christ right up to the present day. So that's what I studied. And he said to me, you're from a Catholic background. You should study the Catholic Church, and you should see how your church does some things very well, and then what some of the problems with the church are. And you could be a figure that helps to reconcile the Catholics with the Orthodox and with the Protestants. He said, you should go to Rome, you should learn Italian, you should work in the Vatican Library, choose a dissertation topic that will take you there, and I'll help you. So I chose a topic in the middle of the Middle Ages having to do with St. Bonaventure, a great theologian, and how he interpreted the mission of St. Francis of Assisi into the scriptural prophecy of the coming of the Holy Spirit, which had been spoken of a lot by the Calabrian abbot Joachim of Fiore. who lived in the 1100s. So this was a whole universe that I entered into, and I landed in Rome without hardly any. I had someone tutor me in Italian, and I had to learn it very slowly with difficulty. And it took me years, 5 years, I would say. But I was fascinated, and I walked across St. Peter's Square that very first summer, 1984, and I saw a man that I had seen on television the night before speaking as the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to Leonardo Boff, and the name was Joseph Ratzinger, who later became Pope Benedict. By pure coincidence, he had been a scholar on the topic of how Bonaventure used the writings of Joachim.
Oh my God, that's a pretty narrow.
It was the exact same topic, and so I had picked up a book in America, which I had in my briefcase, The Theology of History in St. Bonaventure by Joseph Ratzinger. And I pulled it out of my briefcase. I said, "Excuse me, are you Joseph Ratzinger?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And that's how I met him. And I said, "Well, this is your book. I've been reading it. It's helped me enormously as I'm studying Bonaventure and how he used Joachim's thought. I'm going over to the library right now." He said, "Yeah, our paths are crossing because I'm going over to my office at the congregation." He said, "Come by every so often. But I must tell you, you're the only one in Rome who's read that book of mine." Because everything else that everyone in Rome was reading was about the modern crisis and the Second Vatican Council, because he was very influential there. But I hadn't even heard of him except in that book. So I went to the Vatican with no knowledge of modern Vatican affairs. But I became fascinated after that encounter, and I also ran completely out of money. So I went and said to myself, I can try to write something, because I'd been a newspaper reporter. And I got a little paper in Rome called the International Courier to give me $15 for each article. I said, "Will you let me cover the Vatican?" He said, "Okay, you got it." So I said, "Can I write 2 articles a day?" They said, "If there's interesting material, you can do so." And that is how I became a Vatican journalist. As I was supposed to work on my dissertation, I would slip out of the library and go talk to some cardinal or some minister general of a religious order. And I'd say, "What are you doing behind the Iron Curtain?" Because it was the 80s. The Iron Curtain was still up. And I went to Budapest, where there was a big conference on religion in the East Bloc. And I was then, therefore, torn in 2 directions, and only with difficulty, after postponing for 5 years and starting my journalism in Rome, did I turn back and finish the dissertation. But I did finally complete it, and I got the degree from Yale as a doctor of philosophy. But my heart had really shifted into no longer the Middle Ages, but what I call this modern time of our lifetime, which probably will be regarded as the Middle Age 1,000 years from now, because we
almost call postmodernism, right? Almost
postmodern, but so limited and silly in so many ways, and so bedeviled by foolish what do we call them? Politically correct thought that you're not allowed to even raise an objection. I think in the Middle Ages, they may have been more free than we are in some ways. Because if you went to Paris as Bonaventure and Thomas Aquinas was there, and then there were people favoring the Islamic scholars, Averroes and Avicenna, they were debating night and day. There was a tremendous debate going on.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important that you keep writing. I mean, I think, that's, and we have, both of us have that connection to the American founding and everything. And it's important just to keep talking. So we only have about 3 minutes left, and I want to kind of hit some highlights. So you, and I know that you're continue to be friends with Pope Benedict.
Yeah, I even saw him recently, but he was just so old now that I didn't want to raise questions of a polemical nature. But I saw him again recently.
Well, I'm sure just the visit, because it sounds like, if I wrote my thesis on something like that and ran into a young student or wrote a book, and you probably won them over just there.
We were friendly. Yeah, there's a mystery in the what happened to the Catholic Church I think we became trendy. What's happened to our world? I think we've fallen into the trap. They said in the Roman Empire that 6 men controlled the entire grain supply from Egypt that fed most of the Roman Empire. Well, we've got a half a dozen people who have hundreds of billions of dollars. The gap between the wealthy and the poor has perhaps never been so great. And people, when they have power and influence, they tend to spread their thoughts and their ideas, and they have this vision of transforming humanity now in some way to humanity 2.0 or Homo sapiens 2.0 with chips and with better genetic code, etc. But nobody is reminding us that our soul is our life, our breath, and it's what gives us love, it's what gives us courage. It's what was formed by your early years and by your studies and by the things, your sufferings. This is the journey of a soul. And the loss of the soul, Walker Percy talks about this, and Pope Benedict, Joseph Ratzinger, and Jaroslav Pelikan, they're sort of my 3 fathers. My father in the garden, my father at Yale studying medieval history, and then my father in Rome who became the Holy Father, Pope Benedict. But he was also.
Well, we only have a little less than a minute, and I want to remind you, because the words that saying that the pen is mightier than the sword, and you've been a journalist your whole time, so all of us need to speak into that void, because there are things that we cherish, and I think you've lived a life like that. Do you have any final comments in the last 20 seconds or so that you want to leave?
I think of myself, and I think each of us is a link in a long chain, one link. Before us stretched our ancestors and all those who came before us and struggled and worked and prayed and sacrificed and gave us what we have. And we want to hand down to those who come after some part of what we have been given and received with such tenderness. And this tenderness is, I think, the heart of love. And this is what we want to give to the future. And this is our task as Christians and as human beings.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you so much, Bob. It's been a wonderful hour. Again, I could have spent a couple more with you, and I appreciate it. And have a holy and blessed Easter. And thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Craig. Best to you and best to everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Mind to Heart with me, Craig Richardson. My path has led me from the Protestant and Catholic churches, as well as studies in alchemy, mediumship, Eastern philosophy, and most recently, Edgar Cayce and transpersonal psychology. As an intuitive life coach, I am ready to guide you to an amazing life. For more information about me, visit craigericardson.com.
Views expressed on this program are those of the host, guests, and callers, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the station, its management, or advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.